Hey everyone, welcome back to the Monday edition of the Goody Reader Radio Show. My name is Michael, and I'm joined today by one Jeremy Greenfield of Digital Book World, who is actually fresh off of his adventures at Book Expo America. Jeremy, how's it going?
Book Expo was fantastic this year, Michael.
So, what were your impressions of the conference overall? I mean, it's the largest or one of the largest North American publishing event, and it runs in conjunction with the IDPF, which was the body pretty well responsible for uniform ebook standards. And there was a lot of news coming out of the event with startups and established players and product announcements. It was madness. So, give me your impressions of the news coming out of the event overall.
Well, there was a lot of talk about Amazon and Hachette, which I know we're going to get to later, the contract negotiation and dispute between the two of those companies. There was a lot of talk about ebook subscription services, and there was a lot of talk about books. And one of my favorite things about Book Expo America is that you run into someone walking down the aisles of all the publishers, and you start talking about business maybe or something happening with Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and soon you find yourself talking about the plot of a book that someone told you about or that you started reading or that you just finished. A lot of these conferences are really all business, but Book Expo America, you also really talk about what we're all in the industry for at the end of the day, which is books.
Okay, so one of the, now that we're speaking about books, every year Digital Book World has their own event, and you just guys just announced a new one coming up with a whole list of speakers.
Yes, Digital Book World 2015. This will be our sixth Digital Book World. I think it's the best event out there. I know I'm biased, so people should check it out at conference.digitalbookworld.com. We've announced some keynote speakers. It's really early, obviously. It's beginning of June, and the event's not until January, so we've got over half a year to go. But Brian Murray, the president and CEO of HarperCollins, will be speaking. Linda Zecker, the president and CEO of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, will be speaking. Walter Isaacson, who is president and CEO of the Aspen Institute, but also the author of several fantastic books, including Steve Jobs, the biography of Steve Jobs. And then Ken Auletta, that might be my favorite out of all of them because I just love The New Yorker so much. And he is the media columnist for The New Yorker, and he's also the author of the upcoming title, Googled, The End of the World as We Know It. So those are just, in my opinion, four super great speakers, and I just can't wait to see what the rest of the schedule turns out like.
Did you read his autobiography on Steve Jobs?
I did not read the biography of Steve Jobs. No, unfortunately, I did not.
It was great.
Well,
Uh,
that's what I hear.
yeah, I mean, I seldom read a book twice, and I read that book twice. For those of you that maybe haven't read it or maybe just heard about it, Walter and Steve have been talking to each other for like 20 years. So, off and on, Steve would, walk with him and answers questions and give interviews and things like that to him. And, all along it was assumed that Isaacson would be Steve Jobs' official autobiographer. And there's been a lot of books about Steve Jobs' life, the rise of Apple and things like that. But a lot of it comes from articles from the media, other books and things like that for citing sources. But what I liked about the Walter book is that he's just known Steve for so long that it really was evident in a writing where you got this introspective on his life that you didn't get through anywhere else, and I really like that. And it kind of followed, his the rise and fall of Apple and him leaving to, help with Pixar and to do Next, and coming back to Apple and launching the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad and all that stuff. So if you are involved in a lot of things, if your interests are in Apple at all, this is a great book. And yeah, I mean, it was on a New York Times bestseller list for like forever. It seemed like well over a year.
Yeah, obviously it did very well on the New York Times bestseller list. It was one of the big nonfiction hits of the past couple of years, and Steve Jobs led a really interesting life. He was a very important person, and by all accounts, Walter Isaacson did a great job of capturing that. So I personally can't wait to hear him speak, and Ken Aletta as well, and Brian Murray and Linda Zecker should be fantastic too.
So the startup challenge at Book Expo America. This was the first time that it was all at Book Expo America. They did one last year, but it was at the Alley in New York, and they only had sort of like the finalists that went to Book Expo. But this year there was like a lot. I think that there was almost about 20 startups that were all there to vie for raising capital to get themselves known in the industry. And some of these companies actually had some very interesting ways that they were going about book discovery and things like that. What were your impressions on these companies?
Well, I thought that the startup that won, there are a lot of startups that deserve to win. A lot of interesting ideas right now floating around book publishing, and I think we're kind of on like the third generation of digital book publishing startups, and I feel like a lot of the startups that just really didn't have any ideas about how to make money and just sort of thought about being a visionary about the future of books. And those have really gone away mostly. Now it's really about creating utility and creating value for readers and for publishers and for authors. So the startup that won is called The Next Big Book, and it's sort of a book version of The Next Big Sound, which basically uses consumer data and social listening to sort of try to figure out, what the next really popular book is going to be. And the Next Big Book is well on its way. It already has a preliminary deal with Macmillan that we reported on a couple weeks ago, and now it has $10,000 from Ingram Content Group. I don't think it's capital that's going to make a huge difference to the company, but getting involved in a content group, there's a lot of smart people involved in that company, and it could really help them, meet the right people in terms of doing deals with publishers. And I think, publishers have always been chasing after that thing of, how can we figure out what people are going to want next? And they're putting out books that are coming out in 6 months, a year, 2 years is very common. So they have to time it really well. Like, what are people going to want to read in 2 years? So the Next Big Book could be really promising. The startup that came in second place is basically a literacy educational platform that already has made inroads to the classroom. Sourcebooks, I believe, gave them $3,000. Maybe it was $5,000, one of those two, called Clovey. And they have a really solid team also and a really solid idea, and they're already working with people. So it's not like these are startups about, building connections between readers and books without really thinking about how anyone's going to profit from it or if anyone actually really wants to do this. These are real things happening in the real world, and it was great to see.
Did you hear or have you been paying attention to LeVar Burton's Kickstarter campaign for the Reading Rainbow?
Yeah, I heard that they raised over $2 million.
As of right now, they are at 3.2 million.
Wow.
And it's basically they raised $1 million, I think, in less than like 24 hours. There's 29 days to go as of June 2nd, 2014, and 3.298. So basically 3.3 million they've raised. For those of you that are not aware, the Reading Rainbow was on TV for like the longest time, and it was basically a show that made learning fun and encouraged kids to read. And
let's be honest, Michael, everyone is aware of Reading Rainbow, and that's how he was able to raise so much money.
Well, in Canada it wasn't on TV here.
That just surprises me. I mean, I thought it was everywhere. But then Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow are like what I grew up on.
Yeah, I mean, Sesame Street and the Polka Dot Door is what I grew up on here. But yeah, I mean,
that I've never heard of. I have no idea what the Polka Dot Door is.
It was like Sesame Street light. And they had like the type of talking stuffed animals and things like that, but it was basically Sesame Street with like a lower budget, actually probably like no budget. But the Reading Rainbow, I mean, a lot of our listeners are based like in Europe or Canada, and the show isn't simply on TV here. So I guess what they're doing now is that they want to get more online. They want to start doing the shows and producing content, but they want to do it like on tablets, and some of their stretch goals include like Android TVs, Android devices, making dedicated apps. Instead of being freely distributed in 1,500 schools, they want to do it in like 5,500 schools. And it looks like they'll more than likely meet all of their stretch goals. I mean, a lot of people are really backing this project. Are you surprised?
I'm surprised by the amount. I mean, I thought 1 million was like pretty ambitious, and I think probably they did too. But they crushed that number, and I'm really happy for them. I guess now that it's up there, it's LeVar Burton's extremely popular. Reading Rainbow is just so beloved here. Everyone knows Reading Rainbow in America. I mean, and it's one of the few things that everyone does that everyone grew up with. And I don't think that you're going to see that in 30 or 40 years, that there's going to be one thing that everyone grew up with. So now knowing that they did so well, I guess it doesn't surprise me that much. But it is a little bit of a surprise because the number's so big. But LeVar is very popular, and he's fantastic. He hosted our Digital Book Awards last year. He's very charismatic. He's fun. He's funny, and he truly, deeply cares about reading and literacy. So in a way, it doesn't surprise me, except for just how big that number is.
I guess their first stretch goal is 5 million, and it looks like they'll crush that in like a few days. But I think that this, if it could beat 5 million and prospectively go up, which I don't really see anything hindering its path. The more money that it's making, the more media attention it gets, and with that comes more investment. It could prospectively be the highest funded Kickstarter project in history. And I mean
what's the highest one?
Oh, let me look at that. I think it was the Android Gaming Council, the OIA, but I'm not sure.
Well, we can figure that out another time. But I'm really happy to see. I mean, I think that our kids, which is sort of the new digital conception of Reading Rainbow, is really great. It's one of a couple of great kids platforms out there. Kids really have some fantastic things these days in terms of digital reading experiences. And I remember when I was a little kid, I was really excited when I got a new book. And kids today just have access to so much stuff now that it's just got to be wonderful for them.
Okay. The most highly funded project ever was the Pebble e-paper watch, 10.2 million. Next to that was the Oya, which I thought was the highest at 8.5 million. And then the Neil Young music player, 6.2 million. And all of the rest are like, 3.2, 3.9, 4.1. But on the main list is the Reading Rainbow. So
already up there.
Yeah, I mean, it basically just has to like double what it's doing now, and it'll be the second most funded Kickstarter thing in history. And I mean, there's nothing holding it back. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, I remember going to the Scholastic reading fairs when they would drop by the schools and have like the big book fairs where you would.
Totally, me too. I was all over that.
Me too. I like. Leading up to that, my mom would like budget money aside, months in advance, and I would just like go there, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna get like 10 books, and I would like seriously devour like 10 books like within a month or two at the most, because I guess growing up we didn't have cable, we lived like really rural, so kind of grew up like on like a small farm, so we didn't really have like a lot of entertainment, so I kind of grew up just voraciously reading everything. So it was basically like I would be camped out waiting for the Scholastic Fair to open. I'd be like the first one running in and like frantically looking around, like eyes darting to the left and to the right, and just like, oh, look over there, oh, look over there, and just being
I have very fond memories of that. I used to load up on books. I wasn't allowed to get as many as you did. I maybe got like 5 or 6 books, but we were always getting books as presents, and And they knew that's what we wanted, me and my sisters. So we had a lot of books around too. And I loved the little cartoon books that we used to get when I was very little. Yeah, very fond memories of that.
I don't even think growing up that we even had like a big bookstore in town. I think like there was no Chapters. There was, I think like the only way that we bought books was like at like secondhand bookstores, or I think that that was it. Or like, I think, you probably remember like 20, 25 years ago, when you would go to like a big department store, there used to be like a huge book section, like the equivalent of like a Walmart. Remember when like their book sections used to almost take up like an entire aisle? Now they're just like, maybe there's like 30 books there total. So
Yeah, I gotta say I don't remember that. I mean, when I was a little kid, my favorite thing to do was we go to Barnes and Noble. And we had a Barnes and Noble. Grew up in Buffalo, New York. And sometimes it would be Borders, sometimes it would be Barnes and Noble, and it would be a real treat. We'd go there, and we'd maybe once every couple of weeks you'd get a book. I've always had, and I think a lot of active readers are like this. I've always bought more books than I've read. I know a lot of readers do that, and I've been doing it ever since I was a kid.
yeah, I mean, I guess we were, growing up in Canada, especially growing up, like I grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, which was like pretty far northwestern Ontario. So we were kind of like really low, I guess, on a lot of companies' priority of like opening up like a bookstore chain or this and that. So all we had is like indie bookstores and things like that. So I guess I developed like a fond appreciation of like mom and pop indie stores at a really early age. But I remember when I was like, early teenager, I would like make it my mission every week to go to like the used bookstore, like the comic store, and just like load up on like novels and then just like read like a book a day and just like devour them like I was a thirsty man in a desert, and this was like
Hmm.
a bookstore like my own personal portable oasis.
Yeah, wow, that's a great story.
So let's talk about some other news. We kind of touched on this a bit as being the theme at Book Expo America, and the things that everyone talked about was the Hachette and Amazon battle. And we both have been following this story ever since like it really first started developing. So we kind of have a bit of a unique perspective that we've been following the trends, and we've been listening to the Amazon official announcement, which is actually very rare that Amazon ever publicly comments on anything. But they commented on this, and Hachette responded to it. For those of maybe the listeners that maybe casually followed it, what was like the big news out of Book Expo America about the Hachette deal?
There was no news that came out of Book Expo America. Both companies said, or very early on, right before the fair, this came out, I believe, on Tuesday, that this is going to be a long negotiation, that the two sides are very far apart. Amazon's statement was a little bit, I'd say, on the friendlier side, just the way it came out. But I think that most people in the industry, and I think Hachette, by the tenor of its statement, kind of didn't really take it, didn't really think that Amazon was dealing plainly, that the statement was sort of a little bit two-faced. And Hachette's statement had a little bit more bite to it. And the main area where the statements sort of had this conflict was over creating this author pool. And I think the people on the Hachette side were very upset that Amazon sort of publicly made that offer. And I can tell you that my sources inside the company told me that, Amazon came to Hachette just hours before releasing a statement and said, hey, do you want to do this like author thing with us? And before Hachette even had a chance to respond, Amazon put it in its statement. I mean, so the Hachette people were upset. They thought it was an underhanded negotiating tactic. So when they said in their statement, we will be happy to talk about ways that we can compensate authors who lost out in this after we come to an agreement. Negotiation is ongoing. I think the other big thing that's happened somewhat recently, I think it happened over last weekend, is that the buy buttons have been removed for pre-ordering Hachette books on Amazon. And that's really going to hurt Hachette because it's really about bestsellers. How does a bestseller become a bestseller? Well, months and months and months of promotion go into a book before anyone can buy it in a store. You can pre-order it at Barnes and Noble or Amazon or a variety of other places. And then the first day that book's out, all those pre-orders hit the sales charts. And that's how a book goes to number one on that first day. It's not that everyone knows it's coming out that day and they all go and get it. It's that they've pre-ordered it, and then all those pre-orders get counted on that first day, and then that's how a big book shoots up the bestseller list on that first week. So that's really going to affect Hachette bestsellers over the next couple of weeks or however long this lasts.
And Hachette gleans a lot of their sales data that they get on book sales from Amazon, and not being able to fulfill pre-orders really hampers their ability to gauge the success of maybe a new author, or maybe someone not a household name like a James Patterson or anything like that. They'll sell books regardless. But I really feel for the authors that maybe written a title or two, that bookstores now don't know how many titles to order because they're not really getting that key metric sales data that was from Amazon. And same with Nielsen. Nielsen BookScan famously gets a lot of their information from Amazon in terms of being able to accurately define how many titles are selling, and then they could give that information to the Wall Street Journal and various other newspapers that do their own sales charts and things like that. So the ability to remove pre-orders, but also I guess what Amazon did was they're being very sluggish, if you will, at sending out physical copies of books, 3 to 5 week wait periods. So I think with the pre-orders more specifically, do you think that that's going to really hurt Nielsen BookScan data?
I think that's a really good point, that it may not just be the way that it all hits at once. It could also be the issue of the book selling data and sort of those key metrics that people look at. So, I think that's a really good point. I don't know the answer, but I do think it's a really good point.
I wrote an article about this, and I'm interested to hear your perspective. As we all know, self-publishing is something that a lot of people do. And do you think that the longer this drags out and the less money that authors are making, with Hachette right now, because I think I read somewhere that well over 65% of all Hachette's digital sales stem from Amazon. And there's a lot of ways that this Hachette Amazon deal could play out, but with physical titles and prospectively with Amazon getting away with selling books for less, and Hachette making less money, authors making less money, editors, agents, and everyone making less money across the board. Do you think that this prospectively will encourage more people to not re-sign with Hachette but self-publish instead, knowing that they could make more money, and they've already generated a name for themselves by publishing with Hachette, major publisher? They if they really want to promote an author, they have the ability to make that author a household name. Do you think that if worse comes to worse, and say Hachette acquiesces to Amazon because basically they have no choice, and everyone makes less money publishing with Amazon, do you think that more Hachette authors will jump ship and self-publish?
From what I hear, Hachette authors are rallying around the company more or less. But, how long can that last? I mean, let's say if this dispute goes on for many, many months, I think it will affect Hachette's ability to get publishing deals done, to get agents to sign their authors with them. I think it will make some authors reconsider working with the company. But I don't know to what extent. I mean, will it really affect their ability to pick up authors? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're making up the sales in other places, and they can claim just as good distribution. Maybe they can say, "Listen, all the other retailers are just backing us so big right now that that we're doing so well." But also, you have to consider that if you're signing as an author, your book's not going to come out right now. It's going to come out in a year or 6 months or 2 years. But I think in the long term, yes, it absolutely could affect that. And I think, one of Amazon's aims, supposedly, as people have reported in the media, is to, drive a wedge between, Hachette and its authors. And I don't know if that's actually going to happen. It seems like it hasn't really so far. But that seems to be, one of the aims. So I think you make a good point, but I think it remains to be seen.
Okay, so Hachette basically now is trying to not rely on Amazon to such a greater extent. They just recently signed a deal with Books A Million for an online store within a store concept. And the store within a store concept on a retail level, it's relatively a young thing, being able to go in a Best Buy or a Future Shop, and there's like a dedicated Microsoft section where, software, tablets, and everything are being sold. If you walk into certain stores, there's like a Samsung store within a store concept where it's all just Samsung branded phones and tablets and computers and, netbooks and laptops and, etc. But with books, a store within a store concept really hasn't been done to a great degree. But Books A Million has created a dedicated Hachette store within the Books A Million website, and almost all Hachette titles are 30% off, and this is titles that just came out, frontlist titles, and in a lot of cases they're giving 40% off for select frontlist titles, but a lot of backlist titles as well. And so this is kind of one of the moves that Hachette is doing in order to increase their distribution, knowing that they can't go all in with Amazon anymore. What do you think about the diversification and the store within a store concept? Do you think that now that Hachette's doing it, do you think this trend may continue?
I think we might see other retailers do this with Hachette to, capitalize on what's happening with Amazon. I mean, I think we might see for the first time in a very long time, companies like Barnes & Noble gain market share on Amazon. At least among Hachette books, they certainly will, but maybe in the book market as a whole. And I think this is sort of the nightmare scenario for Amazon. Really, the only thing that Amazon is really afraid of here is, if Hachette continues to hold out its negotiations and a company like Barnes & Noble or Books A Million are able to gain some good market share from Amazon, and then the next big publisher to negotiate also holds out, and Amazon uses similar tactics, and then Books A Million starts pushing Simon and Schuster books or Macmillan books, then we might see Amazon start to feel a little bit more pain than it is already. So that's a good point, and I don't know if we're going to see more of that. We already have sort of like sections of these ebook stores. I wonder, will we see a Hachette section in a physical Books A Million?
That's kind of what I'm thinking too, but I it's hard because like bookstores are kind of like laid out by sections. So you have your business section, you have your fantasy sci-fi section, you have your romance section, your newsstand section, and everything's like alphabetical, ISBNs and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that you actually raised a pretty awesome point that like Barnes and Noble could really leverage that. And I think if anybody were to start a Hachette section, I think Barnes and Noble could pretty well do it, because they could do it both online and in the store, where they could say, you could pre-order titles at this special kiosk that we just set up, or something like that. You can't order from, you find yourself unable to pre-order Hachette titles with the other guys, pre-order them with us. We can fulfill them right away.
Yeah, of course, and that's the thinking. That said, Barnes & Noble in particular has not really capitalized on this situation, and very quietly has engaged in some sales of Hachette books. But it raises one of the interesting issues about this contract situation, which is that, the other publishers and the other retailers are sort of incentivized. They're sort of looking on the sidelines and kind of want the conflict to continue going on in the short term. For every Hachette book that Simon and Schuster or that Amazon doesn't sell, it might be selling a Simon and Schuster book. So it's really interesting to watch this conflict because on the one hand, the publishers are sort of rooting for Hachette to beat Amazon because they have this common competitor. I mean, not really competitor, but threat.
Yeah, totally.
On the other hand, in the short term, they sort of want to see Hachette suffer a little bit because it helps their cause in the short term in terms of making more money for their authors today.
I think that from everyone that I've talked to in the publishing industry, I've yet to come to encounter someone that is rooting for Amazon in this case. I think that,
of course, yeah, the industry is not openly rooting for Amazon.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, that if we could foreshadow maybe a little bit or speculate, I know that we're more based on facts and in the present and the here and now, but I do like to speculate every now and again, and I mean, if I could see some really bad things happening if Amazon wins this, because kind of as we talked about before the show, I mean, Hachette's one of the largest publishers in the world, and if Amazon could basically get them to acquiesce to their terms, so everyone's making less money, Amazon's making a little bit more, then all other publishers will basically fall in line because they'll have no choice. And then there'll be this like precedent that's established where, if we can make Hachette and Macmillan bow down to us, that everyone else has to as well. But I kind of fear for other companies but Amazon if that plays out, because as we know, Sony Books in trouble, closed every store but in Japan. Barnes & Noble losing billions on ebooks. They're in trouble. Kobo, they pulled out of selling ebooks in the States. They're losing money selling ebooks in Canada now. Their international distribution is the only lifeline they have, and a lot of these companies were only ever to can compete in a North American market is because of the agency model. About Amazon could not undercut iBooks and Kobo and Sony and things like that because there was a uniformed ebook price. And I kind of see this whole Hachette Amazon battle as being the future of agency pricing. And if Hachette loses, it's basically agency pricing loses for ebooks. And I think that a lot of other ebook retailers are going to be in a real big difficult spot.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people see this as. Is really it's about agency pricing. It's about that big issue. And I think that the folks at Hachette know that. They know that if they capitulate here, that the other publishers probably will too, and then they're never going to see agency pricing again, and then Nook probably goes away, iBooks will be on the ropes, who knows what will happen.
Okay, so now that we've spoken a little bit about Barnes & Noble, they are suspending carrying audiobooks. And
that is news to me.
Yeah, they just announced it today. They sent an email to anybody who's ever bought an audiobook from them before, letting them know that their entire audiobook section is closing July 1st, 2014. Now, for those of you that are, something actually that surprised me, and I don't know if you're even aware of this, but Barnes & Noble's actually sourced their audiobooks from Overdrive, which is one of the largest companies involved in facilitating the transfer of digital content for libraries, ebooks, videos, audiobooks. But Barnes & Noble is actually sourcing all their audiobooks from Overdrive, and they're no longer in the audiobook game. So kind of the way that I see it is that this is a boon for Audible, which is basically really the only company now in the landscape in the US and Canada that actually sells audiobooks. There's really no other companies to really get them from anymore.
Why would Barnes & Noble do this?
They never really released their reasons why. From what I understand, Overdrive changed their DRM encryption. They were using WMA for the longest time, and then they switched to like MP3. But with Barnes and Noble, if you buy an audiobook through them, you can't listen to it through like a Barnes and Noble audio player. You actually have to download the Overdrive app in order to listen to the audiobooks. So I think that Barnes and Noble was thinking to themselves, we're selling audiobooks, but we're encouraging our customers to download like a third-party app, e.g. from Overdrive, and that confuses people. If you're buying books
So
from
they
Barnes,
decided to just give up.
yeah, I mean, it seems like probably they weren't making a lot of money from it. From my perspective, why would you close something that was a money earner for you or that you were profiting by? Likely that they were not profiting at all and they're just closing it because a lack of promotion. I mean, were you even aware that Barnes and Noble sold digital audiobooks?
I was not.
And that's, I think, the root of the problem is that they've been doing this for 5 years, and I have never even saw a press release from Barnes and Noble talking about audiobooks or reaching X number of a milestone in their portfolio. I hear all the time about Audible, which is an Amazon-owned company, buying the rights to another 1,500 audiobooks from a company in the UK that went under, or they've just increased their library to X number of titles. When you buy audiobooks via iTunes on your iPad or iPhone, those books are actually coming from Audible. So they've been pretty strategic in signing off with Apple, which is arguably one of the most successful ecosystems out there. But when have you ever heard about Barnes and Noble's audiobook strategy? Like, never. They never promote it. They never invest any advertising towards it. And I'm from everyone that I've talked to today, no one was even aware that Barnes and Noble sold audiobooks. So I guess they're fading away into obscurity, but I guess everyone that had purchased an audiobook before is encouraged to back them up, because when July 1st rolls around, you won't be able to listen to any of the titles that you had purchased.
Yeah, Barnes and Noble, ever since I started reporting on book publishing about 3 years ago, isn't as communicative as some of the other companies in the industry. Let's put it that way.
Totally. All the time I'm trying to like talk to people and I just get the runaround. It's like, what's the status with Nook Press? What's the status with this? What's the status with that? And they're all like, we can't talk about this. The people who are running it are on vacation. And it's like, you kind of get those talking point PR runarounds. And, I think that that's partly the reason why no one is aware of these sort of things, because they're not willing to talk about it. And if they're not willing to talk about it, what basis do you have of generating a story that may be on the cover of a magazine or, will have more than like 100 words, in a newspaper or something like that. So, they bring it upon themselves. They try to be secretive like Amazon, but it's obviously not working for them with their digital strategy. Okay, so we've talked about a lot on the show today. One other thing that I would like to mention is the Kindle Cloud Reader, and this is an HTML5 based app that would allow people to purchase ebooks through their web browsers, and it's optimized for Chrome and Safari. Amazon originally launched this about 3 years ago, and they did it when they pulled the ability for customers to purchase ebooks through their app on iOS devices. Because Apple implemented a policy where they would take a percentage of all in-app purchases, and with Amazon they sell so much books that this would just give Apple so much more extra money, so they just disabled the ability to purchase within the app, and everyone else followed suit. And so Amazon developed an HTML5 cloud reader where you could read books and buy books in Safari, and you actually get a pretty quality experience. And then whenever you purchase a book, it's immediately synced to the iOS app. They've just done a global rollout. Before, the Kindle Cloud Reader was only available in Canada and the US, but it's actually expanded, I believe, to about 82 countries right now. So,
wow.
India and all these big markets that Amazon is basically in. So like all over Europe, customers can actually buy content from their own localized version of Amazon and be able to read books in a browser. So this is ideal for tablets, or other mobile devices, such as if you have your BlackBerry phone and you don't have a dedicated Amazon app, well, you could use the reader for the web browser and actually read and buy books through the app. So it's a smart move, and I think the Kobo Cloud Reader is the only other cloud reader of note, and it's not available in all of those countries that Kobo owns and operates in. So, Jeremy, we've talked a lot today. Do you have any final thoughts?
I hope that the Amazon Hachette issue gets resolved in a timely manner and that all parties are satisfied and that we can resume paying attention to what people are reading.
Yeah, I'm kind of tired of all this Hachette news, to be honest, but I guess it is probably the largest news in publishing, but I don't see this being resolved until, yeah, I give it like another 4 or 5 months. This is gonna drag the hell out. If it was gonna quickly be resolved, it would have been resolved like the second that pre-orders were disabled. But the fact that it's still going on after the pre-orders are disabled are leading me to believe that the two sides are very far apart. And, this is why Hachette is signing agreements with Books A Million and doing all these other things, because, they know that they can't throw down with Amazon and rely on them, and they're trying to do other things. So, I mean, I wish I could say that Hachette will just stand their ground and not re-sign with Amazon, but I don't think that that's a likelihood. I just see this as dragging out, like the Apple and the whole Apple Justice Department case, or the Google case on book scanning, where it's like years and years later, it's just still going on. It'll never end.
Well, I hope it's not like that.
Yeah, me too. So you guys have been listening to the Monday edition of the Good E-Reader Radio Show. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can drop a comment on this radio show. If you have any ideas for future segments, kindly drop us know. If you're listening to this radio show on TuneIn, SoundCloud, or a myriad of other sources, goodereader.com and digitalbookworld.com are your two online destinations for all things digital publishing, ebooks, and all of that jazz. Jeremy, thanks for doing the show, and everyone else, take care.